Hey everyone, I just wanted to remind you that today's video is part 2 of our review covering the 1931 version of Alice in Wonderland. If you missed last week's video, I'll put a link in the card as well as in the description below. And I also wanted to let you know that you should stay tuned to the end of the video because I have a special announcement. Thanks for watching.
After that rare person in the film that amused us and made us happy, she moves on to the Queen's courtyard. They did find a place that looked halfway decent.
And the costumes looked halfway decent here too.
This was a part that was surprising because with as bad as the film was, they actually had some rather over-the-top costuming for the courtyard people. It's like if they had put that much effort into other parts of the film, it could have been really good. And the Queen, I thought, was an interesting choice. There were unnecessary things about her character, but the person that they chose, she was halfway decent at her part. She had this young, elegant appearance where you wouldn't really expect that of the Queen character. And then, of course, the Duchess comes back on the scene and Alice saves her from the Queen, which is like...
It was really bizarre because the Duchess had just threatened her life with an axe less than a half hour before this, and suddenly, for some strange reason, she's on the Duchess's side trying to save her from being beheaded, and then they're like besties. They walk off together.
And there was made-up dialogue in this as well.
It was just, it made so little sense.
And they wander off to the Gryphon, which according to them was apparently the way to pronounce that.
Like everybody pronounced it as Gryphon. It's a griffin. I don't know where they got the pronunciation of Gryphon from.
So, Alice wanders off with the griffin, thank you very much, to hear the Mock Turtle story. And the griffin, I think the costume wasn't amazing, but it wasn't terrible. And the griffin character, comparatively, was okay. The Mock Turtle was one of the worst characters.
Painful to listen to him.
He was so fake.
The shell part of his costume was okay, but the paint on his face made him look like a rock, and his voice was grating.
The costuming, while kind of weird, wouldn't have been that bad in comparison to the fake crying and just the way he delivered his part.
The fake crying was so awful.
And wasn't he another one of those that looked like he was looking off to read his lines, maybe?
Yes, most of the people looked like they were looking off screen. This
was the part that made my jaw drop.
She literally gasped, and I was like, oh my word.
I was in shock, but that's my 21st century brain. So the griffin starts singing sort of the lobster quadrille song.
This is the part with the lobster quadrille, and they literally stole the scene from the 1915 version for this,
and
with the walruses dancing with the lobsters,
and put it as an inset. And I don't know if I was...
It was just shocking.
I don't know how insulted I was by that, but it's kind of like, I know that movie! You ripped off that movie!
And this is not like we're not even that attached to the 1915 version because it was not that great.
But this was only 16 years later, and they took somebody else's content and shoved it into their terrible version. And it was one of the better parts of the 1915
That's probably what's
the
most upsetting about it, was because it was one of the best parts of the 1915 version.
And
they just straight up stole it.
And I'm not even sure how upset I am. I was just shocked because it shows you, I think, what might have been more acceptable at that time, whereas now people are...
Copyright law has been changed so much that this would never fly today.
And I think sometimes things can be so extreme, like so extremely careful to the point of, like, we know what this product is, why can't you just say it out loud? But back then, apparently it was much different. So yeah, I was probably overly shocked, but you.
We both were, but she was more audibly shocked.
And then, once they got past that very interesting part, they end up singing together, and I'm not even sure if they had all the lyrics right, like in unison, or whether there was like a little fake accent difference that was throwing me off.
I don't know.
And they did a terrible job. This seemed like it was inspired by the 1915 version as well, because you have this prolonged calling to the trial of tarts by the rabbit, and he comes there and gets Alice.
So during the trial, a lot of it was, as you would expect, they did add some things, but they had the witnesses come in. But so many things were changed even there, because the Mad Hatter especially,
this was
disturbing.
This was, shocking might be too strong of a word, but I think he was shocked.
I was shocked.
He comes in and he does the thing of biting his teacup, which it took me a minute to realize what had happened, because he looks like he's throwing up in the courtroom. And then it's being discovered that I think the queen was onto him, that he was this terrible singer. And then the punishment is supposed to fit the crime, so didn't she want him to like dance and sing? And he was saying that he couldn't do that because of his warped time thing. Like it's always tea time. And then it was almost like he was trying to carry out his sentence, and so he did this sort of crazed, pained dance.
And Alice is like sobbing in the background.
Yes.
And it's just so bizarre.
Then he falls down, and I'm like, is he dead?
He was dead.
He was dead.
They put him in a burlap sack and propped him up against the wall and moved on with the trial.
And it was like they put him outside or something and just left the body there. And Alice recovered very quickly from this horrific experience, as usual.
Bizarrely quickly. Yeah. Which is not anything unusual for her character, because she got over so many things so quickly.
They also had a scene where it was like the dormouse had been taken away, and then the dormouse was back in the jury. So
there was no continuity in this movie, because at one point the Mock Turtle and the Griffin were in the courtyard scene earlier, and then they were asleep on the beach, so there was no continuity paid attention to.
The cook managed to get away without dying. Good for her. And Jonathan noticed when the rabbit kept blowing his horn, it was like he was making the noises with his mouth. So that was kind of tacky.
I will insert a clip right here.
Call the next witness. The next witness.
It looked so wrong. They read the poem, but the poem took forever.
Every verse was read and analyzed, and stuff was put in that didn't need to be put in.
There's a reference in the poem to she, so they assumed that since they have it in their heads that the Jack, or the Knave of Hearts, is the one who stole the tarts, he must have stolen them for a girl. So they're trying to get this information out of him, and for some reason they just assume it's the Duchess. I'm not sure why they just assume this.
There's also this line in there where the knave is acting like, well, if it had been for Alice, he would have been glad to steal these tarts. It's like, okay, so now she's an adult.
Is she an adult, or is she a child? Because the knave is real creepy if she's supposed to be a child.
And he's definitely an adult.
Yes.
Whatever.
But it turns out they assumed correctly, and then they're threatening her life if she does not reveal who stole the tarts. She's refusing to give up who her love is.
And they're going to force her to marry the knave, and then...
And he's acting like this is a horrible thing to have happen to him, which was kind of funny.
He's maybe in his 20s, and she's maybe in her 50s. So it would have been an awkward pairing. And then the rabbit confesses, and he wants to take the punishment because, I mean, it's like they're supposed to be...
Apparently the rabbit and the Duchess are in love. And we're wondering if perhaps they saw the play from the 1927 version, because in that one we found it rather weird that the rabbit and the Duchess were going to get married.
But in that one, it was just kind of cute and odd.
Yeah.
In this
was
one,
just, what?
shortly thereafter, Alice really starts to get into trouble.
She gets all defiant again.
Right. And then it was like the people in the courtroom were gathering, but you don't have cards flying up right away. They start making an image of her spin around and around on the screen, and they belabored it and
Just took so long.
slowly more cards start flying at her.
For some reason, they decide to transition to her back in the real world with her head floating in the middle of the screen. Like
just her hair hanging down.
It didn't make any sense. And it was just another thing that was just so bizarre.
And this was another part that was weird, because it's like was this just me? It seemed like she woke up in a modern, for the time, like a 1930s setting, out on this little swing in the yard, and then her mother, I think, calling from what looks like a stucco house for her to come in and have some tea or something.
Yeah. It was...
What?
It made no sense. I feel like we've used the word bizarre so many times in this review, but that's really the only way we can describe a lot of what happened.
This might seem like kind of a... is hyperbolic the right word, review, but it really did get such a strong emotional reaction from us.
We said we should have filmed this as a reaction video.
It totally could have been.
This is probably a film that people would watch just because it's so bad.
If you're one of those people, put this on your list.
Yes. It's not entertaining for entertainment's sake. It's entertaining for how absolutely awful it is.
We could have quit just maybe 15 minutes in and said, okay, this is terrible, don't watch it, but there is that little part of you that's curious what is coming later on, and if we're going to do a thorough review, I guess maybe we should watch the whole thing, but painful.
Mm-hmm.
If Jonathan were to rate this movie, he would give it a 0.5 star, right?
Well, when I first started watching it, I was thinking it was probably going to be like 2.5, because the music was fine. But it dropped from there. Like halfway through, I was thinking this is probably going to be more like 1.5 stars. And then in the courtroom scene, I was thinking this is going to be 1 star. And then the Mad Hatter literally died on screen. I was like, this is going to be a 0.5 star.
I think maybe it's just like the tiniest tip of 1 star point, but that's not a thing.
Yeah, it's just...
Don't do it. Just don't do it.
So I think that's all for this review. We haven't planned anything for next time. We're trying to get something watched with Shayna that she would enjoy. So I guess next week you'll just have to be surprised with whatever we decide to watch. So we'll see you then. Bye. Hey everyone, I know we just signed off, but I wanted to let you know what's coming up next. On Friday, I'm going to be releasing another music video. This one will be along the same lines as the one I did with They Might Be Giants version of Your Old Father William. But this one's going to be using the theme song from the 1931 movie. You're probably hearing it in the background now, so you know what song I'm talking about. I actually really liked this song, and I thought it was a shame that it had to be attached to such a terrible movie, so I thought I'd make my own video with it and use a bunch of Alice in Wonderland footage that I actually liked. So that'll be coming out on Friday, and then next week I'm going to be doing a couple of videos on my own. I've heard about some animated versions of Alice in Wonderland that, according to people online, are absolutely terrible, and if they're as bad as they sound, I don't think Sarah will mind not getting to watch them. She'll probably actually prefer that. This last one was probably plenty for her for a while. So I'll be doing those next week, and the week after, we actually did get to watch something with Shayna. We watched an episode of The Muppet Show that was themed around Alice in Wonderland. So we'll see you back here in 2 weeks for that one. Thanks for watching.
Come along and pass through the looking glass into one.